Hello today. Actually, I'll start just with, just before coming here, I saw the post by Mike on why is the Fed paying interest on reserves. And it's such an interesting subject, but I can't make a post on it yet because I don't think I could explain it to you anyway. Even Mike, who's obviously looking into this. That exact same interview I was listening to on my MP3 player out on the land, and I got to the point that Mike's picked up on, and I just stopped, and I was just standing there going, then I'd run it back, listen again, run it back, listen again, and Mrs. Mystic came up and kind of looked at me strange, but not that strange because it's a sort of thing I quite often do. And I said, oh, I'm just listening to an expert on the Fed that I think he's got it wrong. And basically I do. I think Eugene Farmer had got it wrong at that point, or basically his understanding wasn't quite up to scratch. Now, he is an expert on that field, in that field, but I was a non-expert in that field. It's impossible to explain, basically. I've only ever heard John Taylor, who's often on Econ Talk, explain it in an understandable way, or explain it as though he understood it, and I understood it when he explained it. But I can even remember Russ Roberts not understanding it even when he got John Taylor to explain it to him 2 or 3 times. At the end, I could see Russ didn't understand it either. But I think I got it. And it's one of those things that comes in waves. You get it, and then you either forget it or forget how you understood it, and it goes again. And it's one of these horrible things that you can't explain unless you can explain it from all angles. If you explain it from the Fed's angle, it doesn't sound right. If you explain it from the bank's angle, it doesn't sound right. If you explain it from a member of the public's angle, it certainly doesn't sound right. You've got to explain it from all the angles perfectly and explain it to everybody, or it's just not satisfactory. It is a very, very difficult problem. Now, I certainly don't think I've got it enough to sit here and make a video on where I think Eugene Farmer has got it wrong. But I'll just tell you that, Mike, let's just say I was confused as well. That's probably the best thing to say. I was there, running it back in the field going, scratch head, scratch head. Something is not right here. So, Mystic Brain is working on it, but has certainly no chance of making a video explanation or even a written explanation of where Eugene Farmer, the expert on the subject, is going wrong. So I'll leave it there and go on to the components of real GDP since 2007. It's easier. A Doug Short chart, very colourful, most wonderful, and it's interesting to see the components of GDP, and they really are quite simple. Up there in the top left, personal consumption expenditures, PCE, gross private domestic investment, net exports, goods and services, government consumption expenditure, and gross investment. So it's very simple. Personal consumption, gross investment. Now, it's a bit tricky what goes into gross investment. I'm not totally grokked on that. But basically, if you build a factory, that's it. And I think if a company buys a whole load of new computers for their staff, that's in there as well. That sort of thing is the red one. The difference in imports and exports, we can understand. Government spending, we can understand, because that goes down to local and state level as well. So you can see what goes up and what goes down. The big one that really drove down in the Great Depression recession was the gross private domestic investment. Nobody was opening factories, and nobody was buying computers for the staff, if I've got that right. Yeah, I think it's right enough. At the moment, something called inventory build as well, I think is in there. As in, if a company buys in more goods with the intention of selling them on, I think that's in the red as well. But again, I'm admitting I'm not totally sure. And that inventory build, that buying goods in to sell them because they think the economy's coming back up, as you can see, was a lot that was involved in the red boosting up the Q4 of 2011. And personal consumption expenditure on that chart went up quite well. The idea is that that red will go down in the next quarter, and if we go on to the next chart, which is an economic pick chart, personal consumption expenditures measured 3 different ways is turning down as well. So we can expect the opening Q4 GDP figure probably to be, it might not be 0, but it'll be a lot flatter than a lot of people would be looking for. This was in Business Insider. It was in long columns, and I've just carved them up here. On Friday in Davos, I interviewed Harvard professor Niall Ferguson, who I think's very good at history, but otherwise is an annoying prat, who has been very vocal in recent years about how the world is careening down an unstable path. Unless countries get control of their ballooning debts, Ferguson has argued we will be headed for a crisis after crisis, and Ferguson remains convinced that Europe is on the edge of disaster. Top right, but Professor Ferguson's take on the United States has changed notably over the past year. He still thinks the US budget deficit is unsustainable and that our entitlement programs will ultimately have to be cut, but he has changed his mind about the US's ability to sustain its huge debt load. In one key way, Professor Ferguson now concedes his adversary, Paul Krugman, has been right. The US can carry a much higher debt-to-GDP ratio than he thought. In fact, Ferguson now says even his Harvard colleague Ken Rogoff, who wrote a seminal book about debt crisis called This Time It's Different, may be too pessimistic about the United States. And it goes on to finish with, but Europe, Professor Ferguson says, is still screwed. So Niall and I are together again. Over in California, in a standoff with federal forest officials, Caltrans is proposing to abandon a popular cliff-hanging highway in the San Gabriel Mountains because it's too expensive to maintain. Caltrans' proposal to walk away from the California Highway 39, enjoyed by an estimated 3 million people a year, comes as the state struggles to close its $9.2 billion budget shortfall. To avoid closure, Caltrans is trying to persuade the U.S. Forest Service or Los Angeles County to take over the roadway, which runs 27 miles from the city of Azusa, nearly to the crest of the San Gabriels. Neither agency wants it. You can pen in the fact that Highway 39 is going to close because they just can't afford it anymore. Bing bong gives us VA state senator attaches something. To protect a bill that would require women to undergo an ultrasound before having an abortion. To protect a bill that would require women to undergo an ultrasound before having an abortion. You know all this, don't you? You know, before these girls, ladies, women, whatever you call them, going to have a baby, they're pregnant. And to make them feel guilty about it, they're going to say, look, we're going to take a little picture of your baby and shove it in your face before you have an abortion. So Senator Janet Howell says that she's going to attach an amendment that would require men to have a rectal exam and a cardiac stress test before obtaining a prescription for erectile dysfunction medication. Good on you, Janet. This is maybe for our Ricardo, but on Perry Merling's blog that he does with Danny Nielsen, this is the end of it. The IMF, that is to say, is no bank. because it cannot, in practice, make liquid the market for SDRs. A new allocation would turn a funding liquidity crisis on the part of the European banks into a market liquidity crisis on the part of the central banks. Rather than the Eurozone banks being unable to borrow, the Euro system would have no way to sell €1 trillion worth of SDRs. Such a crisis is unlikely, etc., etc. Get it? Really for Ricardo. To have a look, SDRs are just not an answer to anything at all. This is IMF as well. IMF is the SDRs. This is from the lead man of a team that sorted out Iceland, the IMF team that bunged Iceland a load of money and put the conditionality in place for what they had to do to earn the money or make it so that they can pay it back. First, a team of lawyers was set to work to ensure that losses in the banks were not absorbed by the public sector. Completely the opposite as to what happened in Ireland. Second, they concentrated on stabilising the exchange rate with capital controls. Third, automatic stabilisers were allowed to operate in full during the first year of the programme, effectively delaying fiscal adjustment, and that went out a bit further as well. In other words, no austerity at all, pay out all the social benefits that were proposed to keep the people afloat. But it must be noted, there was a fourth one there as well, but it must be noted that worked for such a little place with only, 300,000 population. It wouldn't work for something like Italy or Spain, or maybe not even Portugal. I'm bringing you the Baltic Dry Index again, the BDI. This one, I've cut off the dates, but this one goes back, well, you can see that peak up is the before the crash, and that great whooshing down is the crash. So this probably goes back to about 2002. And look at the end there. I brought it to you when it went through 1,000, and now it's down to 720, which is the same number as it was at the very depths of the Great Recession in 2000 and early 2009, I would think. BDI is very up and down, but you can see the trend really for the last nearly 2 years has been very down, and that last little push down is very downish. Right, finish here. Bloomberg Business Week, everything you know about peak oil is wrong. And it's a grotesque little article again. And I'm just wondering, I'm thinking that there just aren't any oil experts out there that are journalists that can write decent articles. So they just accept articles from anybody. And this paragraph gives us an idea of the journalist that's writing this article. And I don't think it reads very credible. I'm not saying it's totally wrong, because I can't know any better than he does. But you can just get from articles, the way they are written, how much somebody knows. You've got to read between the lines, and you can't get it right all the time, but I didn't like the look of this at all. Okay, so this is in the middle of the article, but start with oil. In 1971, the Limits to Growth team forecast that the world's supply would run out 10 years from today, and this is grotesque, because if you read the book, you'd know that that is a lie. It is completely and utterly a lie. So starting with a lie in this paragraph doesn't start well. And yet, according to renowned oil analyst Daniel Yergin, and that is dead dodgy, calling Daniel Yergin a renowned oil analyst, and the fact that you have to put the word renowned in there to boost your facts is dodgy as well. Technology advances and new discoveries have allowed oil reserves worldwide to keep growing. Yeah, they seem to be tacking on great amounts of reserves. Reserves. Oh yeah, we've got lots. For every barrel of oil produced in the world from 2007 to 2009, 1.6 barrels of new reserves were added. Now, I'm not going to knock that. I have no idea where he's got that fact from, but I don't like that from 2007 to 2009, over a 2-year period. If that was a 20-year period, I'd go, right, so we're banging on some facts, but it just sounds like it's just snatched a snippet of data that sounds good. The World Energy Council reports that global proven recoverable reserves of natural gas liquids, that's all right, natural gas liquids is okay, and crude oil amounted to 1.2 trillion barrels in 2010. And again, anybody that goes blah, blah, blah on about proven reserves or reserves is just a nonsense merchant, because the reserves, what's there or proposed to be there, is useless. It's how much you can actually get out each year, each month, each week, each day, each moment to put out onto the market that's important. It might be down there, but getting it out through the straw is proving tricky. That's enough to last 38 years at current usage. Add in shale oil, and that's an additional 4.8 trillion barrels, or a century and a half's worth of supply at present usage rates. And then tar sands, including some huge Canadian deposits, add perhaps 6 trillion barrels more. It's just shocking nonsense. You can hopefully tell by that writing, and I'm obviously putting a spin on it that is bad spin, that, the writer of that is either doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's got excited about some little facts that he's dug up, or he's just been put out to bat. Somebody writes something about energy because we're a bit short on it on the Bloomberg website. It's not good journalism. And I struggle to find good journalism on the energy front. It just doesn't seem to be out there. That's it. Bye.